Our next speaker is Patricia Lieberg Clark. Patricia lived in Santa Cruz for most of her life, where she studied marine mammal science at UC Santa Cruz, and then worked as an environmental consultant as well as a teaching assistant in earth and marine sciences at Cabrillo Community College. Presently, she's on the board of directors at a Santa Cruz ocean pollution NGO. She dreamed of studying conservation at Scripps since she was a little kid, and once she arrived, she began working with a team of blue carbon wetland investigators. She hopes to continue this pursuit after she finishes the program today. I met Patty in 2017. I had just started my job, and she had just started the program. And so my first Catalina trip with this program was with Patty. We remember we had that full solar eclipse, that August of 2017. She poured everything that she had into that summer, and when she returned from her hiatus several years later, she hit the ground running on this blue carbon project. She's focused an incredible amount of energy on this project, which allowed her to get her hands dirty, like really, really dirty. You'll see in her presentation. And she also found time to work in Lisa Levin's lab in person. She returned to this program with such a big swing, and it's been incredibly satisfying to see her execute on her plans. After this week, Patty graduates, and we couldn't be more proud of her. The name of her presentation is Secrets of the Mud, Blue Carbon Assessment for the Kendall-Frost Marsh Reserve in Mission Bay, San Diego.
Samantha. Thank you so much, Samantha. I appreciate all your kind words. When first asked if I'd like to do a marsh assessment as part of my Capstone project, I was intrigued, yet I had no idea what an adventure it would turn out to be. The adventure encompassed a variety of field and lab activities and a quick dive into environmental economics. It became clear very early on that the solutions to our queries would be discovered in the mud at Kendall-Frost Marsh. I started working with a team of wetland researchers as a part of the Capstone in the fall of 2020. The work focused on the question, how much is a marsh worth? We knew that the answers would be in the mud. Indeed, by the end of the project, the mud at the reserve did indeed reveal its secrets to us. What we learned was a bit surprising to me, as well as my Capstone committee. In general, the worth of a marsh depends on perspectives. Marshes and other wetlands do a lot of great things for humans and the regional environments. For example, they improve water quality by filtering contaminants. They provide special animal habitats and coastal access for human communities. They buffer the coastal zone from storm surge and help protect infrastructure from sea level rise. Additionally, wetlands have the capacity of gathering and storing carbon that would otherwise become part of the climate change problem. My Capstone project focused on this last item on the list, and the goal was to put a dollar value on the blue carbon in the wetland mud at Kendall-Frost. So, what exactly is blue carbon? Briefly defined, it is carbon that is captured in the planet's ecosystems. Salt marshes, mangroves, and seagrass beds are really good at capturing and storing carbon, so they're known as blue carbon ecosystems. There's a growing concerted effort by scientists and policymakers to study, preserve, and restore blue carbon ecosystems worldwide as they play a role in the effort to offset the overabundance of CO2 in the atmosphere. Let me give you a brief overview of how this works. This diagram shows the profile of a salt marsh. The marsh plants capturing CO2 from the atmosphere through photosynthesis. The carbon from the CO2 becomes part of the plants and then is stored in the soil as dead plants accumulate in the mud. The buried carbon, known as peat, accumulates over time as layers in the mud. And this is the carbon stock that is subject to blue carbon value calculations, along with the rate that it accumulates in a given marsh. Historically, there were approximately 4,000 acres of wetland in what we now call Mission Bay, San Diego, California. Construction projects began in this area in 1949, and like so many areas in California, these alterations led to the destruction of coastal wetlands in the region. Today, only about 40 acres of that original 4,000 remain in Mission Bay. Most of this 40 acres is encompassed in the Kendall-Frost Marsh Reserve. and that's in the northeastern part of Mission Bay. The reserve is part of the UC Natural Reserve System and also includes the Northern Wildlife Preserve, which belongs to the city of San Diego. My capstone was a blue carbon assessment of the Marsh Reserve. The project considered research questions about the age, carbon concentration, rate of accumulation, and the present and future dollar value of the reserve. Our project methods included mud core collection, initial mud processing in the lab, age determination and carbon content analysis, and a preliminary economic valuation for the whole marsh. This is the complete map of the mud sampling locations for the reserve. Each pinpoint is a place where we have sampled or have yet to sample for future analysis. For this capstone project, however, only sites 3, 16, and 29 were analyzed for carbon content. These sites are shown here in red boxes on the map. Mud samples were collected in what is essentially a large metal cylinder that's pushed into the ground. The cylinder is known as a Russian peat core, which is commonly used in sediment studies. In this video, I'm attempting to hone in on my mud core collection skills. Committee member Dr. Matthew Costa is sharing his expertise. The photo to the right of the video shows a core of mud after it's been pulled out of the ground. Sometimes we use different apparatus to collect our tubes of mud. This was accomplished with the help of the illustrious MAS 2021 cohort. And this mud cylinder, though, was made out of polycarbonate, and a photo of one can be seen in the center of this slide in the photo. It should be noted that if you ever have the opportunity to work in a marsh, you will certainly develop a sense of camaraderie with your team and a sense of humor as you learn to harmonize with the mud. So after the sample collection, the next big step was to process the mud samples back at Scripps. The goal of the initial processing was to prepare the dried mud samples for the next stages of analysis. This initial processing involved milling the mud sample with a mortar and pestle. One subsample was then analyzed for carbon content, and the other was used to collect plant material for age determination analysis. Now for the results of the capstone research. I'll give you a quick overview of our results, which indeed we were indeed able to establish estimates for age, carbon stock, carbon accumulation rate, and the general blue carbon value. And we were fairly surprised by the results. Although our age may have varied at a few locations, we were able to discern that in the top 4 sediment layers that extend down from 0 to 135 centimeters are very young, which is approximately 150 to 350 years old. Below that, however, the mud age changed abruptly to about 1,748 years old. Most of this older layer, unfortunately, is not in the frame of this photo. Now for our findings regarding the carbon stock and accumulation rates for the reserve. This is where the biggest surprises came to play. We calculated that a carbon stock of over 1,000 metric tons was stored in the top 1 meter for the whole reserve. That's just the top meter for the 16-hectare reserve. And for the accumulation rate, we calculated that about 15 metric tons of carbon is being added to that top 1 meter for the whole marsh per year. We were a bit surprised that these carbon values were as high as they were. They fall somewhere in the middle of the global average, but we actually expected the numbers to be a little bit lower than that. So this brought us back to our original question. How much is the marsh worth? What is the potential blue carbon value for the Kendall-Frost Marsh Reserve? The table summarized here is our preliminary economic valuation for the Kendall-Frost Marsh. And I know it's a little bit to unpack, so I will describe it carefully. First, please note that the 3 bright blue columns on the left are the data that we derived during this mud sample analysis from this capstone project. The first blue column shows the carbon stock. The second, the 15 metric tons of carbon added to the reserve each year. And the third, the amount added to the carbon stock each decade. These carbon values were then used to estimate the economic value of the marsh. I converted the carbon to tons of equivalent CO2 emissions and applied 4 different dollar values per ton of CO2. $18 is the current carbon price in California and reflects the amount that Californians are actually paying in taxes, etc., to reduce carbon as a part of the state cap and trade program. Economists would mostly agree that the $18 reflects current spending in California per ton of CO2 saved. The next three numbers are all values that try to estimate the damage of one more ton of CO2 would bring to the entire globe. There's much more disagreement on these numbers. For example, the current federal estimates of economic damage, shown here as the Biden number, can be quite different depending on the discount rate, but the federal numbers may have missed some connections between ecosystems and the economy. Kate Rickey is a climate change economist at Scripps and UCSD. Her calculated CO2 cost is much larger, coming from different assumptions about how ecosystems and the global economy react to an additional ton of CO2. You can see that the calculated values using the Rickey number are staggering as they climb from a present value of $1.6 million to about $2.8 million 50 years from now, just at Kendall-Frost. If the properties adjacent to Kendall-Frost were to undergo wetland restoration through the Rewild Mission Bay proposal, then the potential blue carbon value of the area would increase by quite a lot. With the addition of Campland and De Anza, the area would go from 16 hectares to 71 hectares. Then if we apply the same Kendall-Frost formulae to this new acreage, the land would be worth over $7 million right now, and over $12 million by 2070. All of these blue carbon values are much higher than we expected, even when considering only those federal numbers. So it turns out that even small historic wetlands can be worth a lot of money. The numbers given in the previous tables are not trivial, especially when one considers that they only represent one of many ecosystem service values that a wetland can offer. Earlier, I mentioned other services offered by marshes include water quality, coastal access, sea level buffering, etc. And these services have not yet been quantified for the Mission Bay region. In this Capstone project, we quantified one type of wetlands worth, and that is for blue carbon. In closing, I want to note that this Capstone project has been an absolutely amazing learning experience for me, but has also offered a glimpse into the optimistic possibilities for the future of climate change resilience that are represented by the Kendall-Frost Marsh Reserve and other urban wetlands in the Mission Bay. There are so many people to thank for their assistance in this MAS endeavor. And this includes the time beyond the capstone. I want to thank Samantha Murray and the Center for Marine Biodiversity and Conservation, Risa Farrell, and my wonderful cohorts for 2021 and 2018. I also wholeheartedly thank my family and Santa Cruz friends for their love and incredible support during every step of the way back to Scripps after my hiatus. I will always be eternally grateful. In addition, I would not be anywhere without my amazing, enthusiastic, and patient Capstone Advisory Committee, which consists of Richard Norris of Scripps, who is the chair, Mark Jacobson of UCSD Economics, Matthew Costa of Scripps, and Andrew Meyer of the Rewild Mission Bay and San Diego Audubon Society. I also want to thank all of you out there in the virtual world for your kind attention. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
All right, Patricia. So we have a question for you.
Yes.
The question is, can blue carbon systems take all of the excess carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and solve the global climate change problem?
That is a very good question. And the answer is no. Natural climate systems are one way of attempting to alleviate the overabundance of CO2 in the atmosphere. And it's an effort that should be implemented in concert with a lot of other ways, such as the reduction of producing the greenhouse gases. But, so no, it is a step in the right direction, but alone it would not be able to solve the problem. But we believe it's very important. It's a very important component.
Great. And we have a question from the web. This question is from Lori Mendez, who you know from your 2018 cohort.
Lori.
Have you shared your data with the local authorities and beyond?
We have had the data for about 3.5 weeks, and we definitely plan to share. We had the joy of working with Andrew Meyer from Rewild, and so our conduit to the outside world will be through him, at least at first. Thank you, Lori. Good question.
Excellent call, having Andrew Meyer from Rewild on your committee.
That was a great idea.
And then the last question is, are you planning to give any presentations or produce any media that targets local stakeholders about this issue?
Yes, I ran out of time for this during this capstone period, but I intend to make a video PSA with the help of Dr. Norris and others regarding this issue that we can use locally.